I'm going to just give a quick history of Wagtail, which is going to start with the history of Torchbox, because the two are quite interrelated, or at least the beginning of Wagtail was quite interrelated with Torchbox. So I'm the co-founder of Torchbox. We are a digital agency based in the UK, about 70 people. We have offices in Oxford and in Bristol. And Torchbox, I started Torchbox as my co-founder in 2000, so we're in our 19th year now. And we set out to make big websites for people who are making the world a better place. Is broadly our mission. And I'm really happy that that's continued to work out. I guess the thing that we have been best known for is large content managed sites, and that's what we've been doing almost from the beginning. So in the early 2000s, even the term content management wasn't really widely known. I think we had something that we called an authoring system built in Cold Fusion, probably way before most of your time. It was a system that we rather liked, but we started feeling a bit uncomfortable in the kind of mid to late 2000s that some pretty large organizations were depending on this piece of software that was just being managed by a small group of people in our Oxfordshire offices. So I did a big analysis of open source content management systems. We were by that stage already heavily using, and we were strong proponents of open source. And we picked Drupal. Probably familiar to many of you, a very successful, powerful open source content management system written in PHP. And Drupal was really successful for us financially. Commercially, it was, particularly in our sector, in the non-profit sector, it was very, very popular, and we built a big team on Drupal. We built a lot of sites that we were very proud of, that we're still very proud of, for organizations like Greenpeace and Oxford University. But as the years went on, the other part of our technical team, who were building custom applications, web applications, were really focused on Django and Python. And we started feeling more and more frustrations with Drupal. And I don't want to spend time criticizing Drupal, because it's a very powerful piece of software, but we've just increasingly had this feeling that that content management could work better, or particularly for the kind of large information-rich organizations that we were working for. And we had some pretty strong ideas about how it could work better. And of course, you don't want to build something unnecessarily, and it could be argued that we should have taken one of the other systems and worked with it. But in the end, we made the decision to start building Wagtail, which is named incidentally after, you probably can't quite see from this picture, but I'm in our fairly rural offices in Oxford, which are surrounded by this beautiful countryside. And I don't know anything about birds, but there are these birds that arrive in spring, and they're here till autumn, and they just congregate in a little bit of lawn just outside here, and they're called wagtails, and everybody loves them. So that became the name of choice. We were lucky; we were commissioned by the Royal College of Art, who are one of the eminent arts institutions, arts universities in the world. So they funded the development of Wagtail, which didn't even have a name then. And they stipulated that it was open source, which meshed exactly with our own plans for it. And so then in 2014, we open sourced it. In fact, we announced the launch at a fantastic Django conference that was organized and run by Daniela, our other host, which I think was maybe the first time that he and I met. And we had always been keen that Wagtail was going to be properly open source and more than just putting the code up on GitHub somewhere. But even then, we were taken aback really by the levels of interest. Particularly the first few months, there was a dramatic surge of interest in a new content management system for Python and for Django. And I think that was the first time that we had been responsible for a significant open source project, and it took us a bit by surprise. And I think there are some things we definitely could have handled better in those early days. But we got used to it, and we started building a core team made up of some people from Torchbox, but increasingly people from other agencies and other individuals. And we watched Wagtail grow, and it's been amazing really over the last few years, seeing not just the sites that we are building for our own clients, but the tens of thousands of organizations that we're aware of, and presumably more that we're not aware of, who are using Wagtail. And at this point, I usually use some of the big names because they're very reassuring to hear. People like Google and NASA and Salesforce and Apple and Mozilla. And then for us in the UK, a really key moment was when the National Health Service switched in a very public way to Wagtail. So they had this is one of the most high-profile sites in the UK, nhs.uk, very well known for anyone who lives here. And the NHS is, I think, was at one point was the largest employer in the world, is now number 5 behind McDonald's and Walmart and a couple of others. But this is a big deal in the UK, and they talked about it in a very public way. And that was a kind of tipping point for Wagtail reputationally, because it meant, particularly in the sector where we're focused, in the non-profit sector, which tends to be pretty risk averse, seeing Wagtail's adoption by the NHS was a game changer. So 5 years on, we are perhaps the most popular Python CMS on top of Python, which fortunately for us has become the world's fastest growing programming language. And some of you may have seen the amazing growth charts from Stack Overflow and so on. Not all of that is about web development. Python's growth, I think, has come a lot from its use for machine learning and big data, and as the standard programming language in computer science curriculum. But it's meant that Wagtail's in this exciting position and used by both some of the big names I mentioned already, but also lots of smaller companies and agencies and charities and museums and universities and governments. And that's for me, that's now the most exciting part of my job, is talking to people who are using the software that was created by a small group of people originally, and has now become part of this larger community. I want to talk a little bit about why you might choose to use Wagtail. And of course, there are many options for content management systems. There's WordPress, which powers something like 25% of the web, which probably familiar to everyone on this webinar. And then other powerful open source CMSs like Drupal, or indeed Django CMS. And Wagtail isn't perfect, and it's certainly not perfect for every use case, but it fits the kind of large information-heavy sites which have busy teams of editors who need intuitive, fast content entry interfaces, but it's also suited to developers. So, and I think this is a point that I found quite hard to make, particularly when I'm trying to distinguish it from other systems. But I'll talk about Drupal again, and this is not to denigrate Drupal, but just to explain the difference, really. That in Drupal, as an administrator of the site, you have a lot of power. You can create new content types. You can say, I'm going to create a new event section, and I'm going to define how to model events within that section. And that seems like a really appealing thing when you're choosing a content management system, because you think, I'm not going to have to pay those pesky developers to do all this work, because I can do it myself. But in our experience, it turns out that power comes with a lot of extra friction when you want to build sites. And in order to make that possible, Drupal has to be quite opinionated about a lot of things. And then you find that as developers, you're often working around those opinions. So Wagtail, to start off with, is a much more stripped down experience. So what you get out of the box with Wagtail when you first launch when you go through the kind of 20-minute tutorial feels pretty minimal. And we might see this a bit later when Danielle shows us how easy it is to get it running on Divio. But the upside of that is that there's complete flexibility. Wagtail has no opinions on how your markup should work, and it leaves it up to you to model your content. And it does all this in a way that should be really familiar to Django developers. So it's pretty light on magic. If you are a Django developer and you know how to define models and you know how to make templates, then you should feel at home pretty quickly in Wagtail. So I guess that's a sort of summary for where we are now. Wagtail is a popular and increasingly popular piece of software that's been widely adopted by some big names. That offers a lot of flexibility and complete control over the sites, and is optimized for developers and for content entry. And with that, I'll hand over, I think, to Daniela.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm going to dive straight into sharing my screen with you. And if I can get everything at the right size, that'll be a good start. So I hope everyone can now see my screen nice and clearly. Thomas, can you confirm? Good. Okay. So as Tom says, Wagtail is one of the most popular Python, probably the most popular Python web content management system. It's a wonderful thing for a developer to have in their hands. As ever with Django projects, deploying it reliably and swiftly to the web is sometimes another matter, and that's where we come in with Divio, because our aim is to make Django projects in particular, but also other kinds of web projects, easier and more pleasant for application developers to work with. So I'm just going to take you at quite a fast pace through the whole process of doing that. I won't stop and explain everything, but feel free to save your questions up for Thomas, and we can discuss those afterwards. So I'm here right now in the Devio control panel. I've got multiple organizations set up here, but this one is one I've created specially for this. So I'm going to create a new project, a new Wagtail type project. Wagtail is one of our built-in kind of project starter kits, so that you can get started very quickly with a Wagtail project. We'll call this Wagtail Live. It's going to be in Python 3, of course. We'll use Wagtail, and we have other, as you can see, project types available, even PHP, but for now we're sticking with Django, Python, and Wagtail. So let's deploy that. I'm going to skip the creating a subscription. I don't need one. It's going to be a free project for now. And what's happening here, it's provisioning the project. So what it's actually doing, well, it has done it now. It has created a number of Git commits that represent this project. As you may know, when you start a Wagtail project, you set up a home application if you're following the Wagtail documentation. So I'm just going to install one that we've got ready made as an add-on here. I'm going to install that into our project. And you'll see there are now 2 more commits. We've got 9 commits in total. And I'm going to deploy that on our test server. So we have a test server and a live server. The test server is for our own private use, can be shared. The live server is what we'd use when we're finally ready to share this with the public. So this goes through a few steps. It uses the Git repository, which is contains a Docker file, because we use Docker for this, for our containerization. It's provisioning the backing services. These are the things that application developers don't like and that you need to get your admin team or your DevOps people to do. It's building the Docker image. Those backing services that I mentioned, there'll be things like the web server, the database, the media storage that aren't part of the project code, but which you need in order to get your project live and actually running, so that it's not just code, it's running in a real environment. So when it's building the Docker image, it runs through the instructions in the Docker file that we have provided, which includes things like installing all the pip requirements. Now it's running the migrations, that is the Django migrations. It'll be doing things like collecting the static files. And as soon as this blue bar turns green, which is now, it's actually ready for me to use. So if I hit the link, this is the link of our newly deployed test server. It's logging me in through our single sign-on, our SSO, and I'm in the site now. So let's jump into the admin. So if you're familiar with Wagtail, this will look very familiar to you. So here's the pages that's already been created. I'm actually going to delete this page and create one of my own at the root. So let's create our new page here. This is in the new home page model that I created, that I added to the project when I added that add-on. That's home, Sweet Hope. Yes, okay. Remembered from my testing before. So now we have a page and some content. I can publish that page. Oh, I'd better create a site object, which will take, we can just use localhost for that. The root page will be the home page I've just created. We'll make that default site, save it. And now if I go back to my page, I can see that I've got that live. It's not much of a website, but it is a running website that's publishing content. So I now want to do a little bit of work on this website. So what I'm going to do is just copy the, this is the website slug. I'm here on my own desktop now. We have a Devio desktop application, and but I'm not going to use that now. I'm going to show you how to do all this using the command line. Our desktop application allows you to do some of the same things, and it's easier for users who are new to some of this, but it's easier to understand what's happening if you're a developer by watching what I do with the command line. So I'm going to do Divio project set up, and I'll paste in the slug of that project. I hope that text is large enough on the screen. What's going to happen now, it's cloning the Git repository that's representing our web project. It's pulling it down onto my system. And now it's going to build the Docker project from the instructions in there. So we've already done we've done everything. We've even collected the static files. It's now pulling down the, going to pull down the database from the project that's on the cloud into the local database. And then it's going to, it doesn't need to do it for media because we don't have any media. So there we are, it's running migrations. Oh, it is trying to pull down the media, but there's nothing to do there. Okay, let's go into the Wagtail project. And I can show you what that looks like here. It's a standard Django project with settings files and all the things that you're no doubt already familiar with. So let me start the project up locally. Docker Compose up. We use Docker Compose locally to manage the project, to control it. So the project's now running, and I can find it on my localhost. There it is. It's the same content that was being published on the web, and I can log into it. Now, if I go straight to the Wagtail admin, I'll be asked to log in. So I'm just going to make my life easier and use the special URL Django admin, because that one knows about our SSO, which also works locally. So I'm logged in now. And let's go back to the, here we are in the Wagtail admin with our page that I created a moment ago. And I can, there's the page that I created on the cloud a few moments ago. We can add a little bit of content here if we want to. Oh, that's actually wrong, isn't it? HTML is, of course, where the, it is. So I can manage my content locally. It's all staying on my computer at the moment. It's not being pushed up to the cloud, but I can do that later. One thing that we have here on our local site, let me open that in another tab, is that the styling's not up to much, the template's not very interesting, so let's improve that a little bit. I'm going to jump into the base template of the project, and all I'm going to do is add a little H1 here for the page title. You'll excuse my copy and pasting because watching me type things in is not very interesting. And there we are. There we've now got the template in our project. This is really just to show you that this is a completely standard Django project. Now, what I'm going to do in a moment is push this development work, I hesitate to call it that. I've added a single line of HTML so far, but we'll do a little bit more in a minute, and then we'll push that back to the cloud, and you'll get a sense of the entire development cycle. So while I've got this fabulous web page with my H1 in it sitting here, I think it might be a good time to go back to Tom Dyson, because Tom obviously knows all about everything that there is to know in the Wagtail ecosystem, and perhaps can make some suggestions about what you would do next if you were an actual Wagtail developer looking at a site like this and wondering what to do next.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm not sure I know all about what there is in the Wagtail world, but I'm certainly familiar with quite a bit of it, and I think there are a few ways that you can pick up that familiarity. And the first thing I'd recommend for new Wagtail developers would be to join the Slack. So we have a public Slack channel which you can get to at wagtail.io/Slack. And that's a good way of, many of the questions that might be asked there could be answered, are often answered with people saying, well, here's such and such Wagtail app will help you solve that problem. And you start to see the kind of the better respected answers float to the top of those kind of questions. And similarly with Stack Overflow, there's a pretty active Stack Overflow community, which uses the Wagtail hash Wagtail to organize questions and answers. And of course, you can search on GitHub. So I have 2 or 3 searches which I run periodically to show me new open source projects, either which are using Wagtail or which are additions to the Wagtail ecosystem. And that's how you see the kind of the freshest new stuff. But on top of all that, we have a more managed view of the ecosystem, and this is not unique at all to Wagtail. It uses the so-called awesome namespace. So you've probably seen these around. There are quite a few of these awesome-something repos on GitHub, and there's an awesome-Wagtail, and it's a big README with a categorized list of applications and plugins and tutorials, and I'd recommend that's the best first stop. And if some of you are looking at that now, then I could highlight some of them. So if you just Google awesome-Wagtail, I'm sure you'll find it, but it's under the Springload organization on GitHub. I believe that the kind of the general etiquette is for these awesome repos not to be hosted by the the prime developers or the sort of the main organizations behind them. So there's one called Wagtail-autocomplete that's written by someone known well in the Wagtail community, Harris, and this is a really nice example because it solves quite a specific problem, but in a very mature and well documented and well tested way. And it's quite an interesting aspect of Wagtail because we had imagined that Wagtail, when we first designed it, would be focused on pages and page type content, but increasingly we're seeing that people are wanting to manage non-page content in Wagtail in the same way that people might have used the Django admin in the past, but gaining all the kind of the workflow and the UI advantages that the Wagtail brings. And Harris's plugin Wagtail-autocomplete just makes that a slicker experience. And in fact, it's our intention to bring that into core Wagtail. There's another one. If you're using locations, then you might want to use Wagtail-geo-widget from Freud, F-R-O-J-D, who are a fantastic Swedish agency. They've done a lot of cool Wagtail stuff, and this is a frequently updated and mature piece of software. Again, it does a simple thing, but it does it really well. As an example of a couple more complex projects, there are 2 from the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. So this is a big US government agency. We have 2 members of the team there, or on the Wagtail core team, and they have, I think, possibly the largest open source Wagtail project. So their whole site is available on GitHub, and I recommend actually just following that site and looking at some of the techniques they use as a great example of doing a big Wagtail site well. But more specifically, they've open sourced some of the tools that they've used in order to make that site. One's Wagtail flags, another is Wagtail sharing. And this makes it possible for you to make previews of your draft content available to people who may not even have Wagtail accounts. So if you want to get something signed off by by a lawyer or perhaps a medical expert or something, and they may only need to sign off this one content. You don't need to train them how to use Wagtail. Then using this package, you can share that specific view using a secret URL or a special password or something. I won't keep going through the list, but I hope that we'll have a chance to share some of these URLs with attendees afterwards. The main point, I guess, is to go to the awesome Wagtail repository and to look through some of the projects which are listed there.
Thank you, Tom. What I want to do next now is show some of these things that Tom mentioned, and I chose two things that I think offer the maximum impact for the minimum input. So I'm going to share my screen once more and show you how easy and quick it is to do some of these things in Wagtail and to get them deployed onto our cloud. So as you probably know, you'll have, you can upload images into Wagtail into the image manager and then insert them into pages. But one very nice thing that Wagtail can do is do some intelligent things with those images. One of them is it can detect where the important parts of images are using Python OpenCV, and then automatically mark those in your images so that when the images are placed in pages and cropped, they'll be cropped without cropping out important parts of the images. Normally you have to do that manually, but you can also get Wagtail to do it for you automatically. So what we're going to do is this. This will give me an opportunity to show you our Docker file, because I need to install some system libraries in here. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to copy and paste just because it's more reliable. I'm going to run some apt-get commands to install the libraries we need that will be built into the project. Into the project's Python requirements here in the requirements file. This is Python OpenCV. And then in the Wagtail, in the Django settings themselves, I'm going to enable the feature. So I'm going to paste this in here. Now, it's worth my taking a moment to explain what you're seeing here. This is actually a standard Django settings file. It might look a little bit different, but what it's doing is auto-generating many of the settings that it needs for things like Django, for Wagtail itself. So for example, our installed apps that we need in this project are already installed in the project through the add-on system that allowed me to add Wagtail itself and the Wagtail home application. So these self-configuring applications are very easy to deploy in a Devio project, and they are installed in the settings file. I don't need to touch them. I can extend the installed apps if I need to. I can manipulate that and do things with it. But for what I'm doing now, I don't need to do anything. I can just be confident that it is correctly installed by the Wagtail add-on that's in the project. And I can just add this line that will enable the feature detection. So that's now in the project. And I'll go to my, let's stop the server here. I'm going to run docker compose build because I've made some changes to the project. I need to run this when I do that. So it's going to install the pip library that I put in the requirements. And it's going to install those components into at the system level. We'll give that a moment. These are the pip requirements that you can see going by. And as soon as that's finished, which should take only a moment more, we'll be ready to start the project again, and I can show you this, what it's doing. Okay, so it's successfully installed the pip requirements. These moments of waiting are always the worst, but you know what it's like with computers. You just have to let them do their thing. And I'll show you the images that I've got here. So I've got the a few images. I think we'll use the former National Security Advisor. We'll install him into our project. So there we are. Now that's built the project. I can run Docker compose up once more. And that's starting up the project. And let's just refresh this. There we are. So let's get the image that we're going to drop into there. It's just a drag and drop operation that's now uploaded into the site's images. And if I click on the image, you can see that it has correctly identified his face as the appropriate focal point of this image. So that's really nice. It's something that you don't have to do yourself. And that's really clever. That's something that Wagtail has pretty much built in with just a couple of lines of code. You can enable it, but we can be even cleverer than that. So let me show you something else. Let me go back to the project again. I'm going to use a third-party application called Wagtail Alt Generator. I'm not sure if you mentioned it, Tom, just now, but this is one that can look at your images and analyze the actual content of the images and add that into the image metadata in Wagtail itself. So what we're going to do is this. It's called Wagtail Alt Generator. And what I'm going to do is extend my existing list of installed apps with Wagtail Alt Generator. And I'm going to put that also, let me save that. I'll put that also into the requirements. It's a package that can be installed from pip. Oh, and back in the settings, I need to have a key. Wagtail Alt Generator can use various backends for processing the images. And for this one, we're going to use Microsoft's Azure Cognitive Services. So they've got lots of really nice APIs that you can use, that you can plug very quickly into your projects. And this one is their computer vision API. So let me save the settings and once more rebuild the project. Again, this will take a moment or so. Now, what you're seeing here, that was very quick. That's all already rebuilt. And let's take the project up. What you're seeing here is a kind of speeded up version of the normal development cycle where you would change code or configuration in your project, then rebuild it so that you can ensure that what runs locally is also going to run in our cloud. And then you can take the project up. So let's start up the project. Give it a moment. Django has started. So I can refresh this. And let me get the rest of those images. In fact, let's get all of them. And I'm simply going to add an image. I can drag the whole folder, put that in there. So it's processing the images. It's sending them to the cloud. That's pretty good. There you are, a tree next to a body of water. I would say not bad. Even more impressive, here we have John R. Bolton wearing glasses. A close-up of a map. And this is, give this one a moment. I think this is a slightly larger image, so maybe it's a bit slower. This is a car covered in snow. And since I took this photograph in Accra, in Ghana, in August, I don't think it is actually covered in snow. This is the rush hour in the capital of Ghana. So it's not perfect, but here they are. And this gives us good ways to search for images and use this metadata in our projects. So if I went back to my page, for example, I can edit my, let's go. Sorry, there we are, edit my page, and I can insert an image into the page in a car covered in snow. Not really, but to insert that into the page. Let's publish that and check that it's still showing live as we expect it to. There it is, our page with its title, with its content, and so on. So the last thing to do now is to complete this cycle and push my local development and content work back to the cloud. So let's have a look and see what has changed in Git. So the only things that have changed are, of course, actual project code and configuration. The database, the media storage, they're completely separate. So first of all, of course, I added a template. So let's commit that, git commit, added to the base template. There's one commit. And I changed the Docker file with some system packages to install. I changed the requirements by adding a couple of Python packages I wanted installed in the project. And of course, I changed the settings by adding some configuration and a new application to the installed apps. So let's git add everything else and git commit added image recognition features. And I can push that now to the cloud because our project is maintained in Git. If we look back now at the project, you can see here that we've got 2 undeployed commits. These are the ones that I've just pushed up to the cloud. And I can hit deploy and it will deploy just as I did before, but I love doing things on the command line. So I'll do Devio project deploy, and I can do it from right here. We've got 2 servers. We have a test server and a live server. So I could have done Divio project deploy live to deploy the live server, but right now we're just doing the test server. As you can see, let me move this along a bit. This is building here, and we've got the API that shows us exactly what's happening at the same time right here. Meantime, I've got to remember to push my database and media. So let's do those as well. Let's do Devio project push DB. And yes, we're going to override the cloud database. That's compressing it locally, and then it's going to push it up. And as soon as it's finished that, I'll do the same thing with the 4 media files that I uploaded. Again, this is one of those waiting moments when you just have to sit back and let the machine do its things. Oh, it's nearly finished. It's running the migrations. Again, as soon as this turns green, it's going to be ready to deploy with the new code that I've pushed up. In fact, we can see it here in the activity log. These are the actions that have been taken. I've deployed. And let's see if the database has been pushed. Yes, it has. So let's do the same thing. Devio project push media. So the database, the media will also be up live there as well. Now, back on the cloud side, over here, if I refresh this, we should see the content that I've pushed from the database. There's the page with the content that I edited locally, and I can see what it looks like on the cloud site as well. So this is being published from our cloud platform. And as you can see, the media files are also there as well. Now, I've done this very fast. I've gone through the steps much more quickly than you normally would, because as you know, development's a bit slower than that. But that's the complete cycle. And I didn't have to care about any aspect of this work that didn't concern me as an application developer. I didn't have to worry about correctly wiring up my S3 storage that we use. I didn't have to worry about getting the database right. I didn't have to make sure that I'd set up the database on the live server and on the test server appropriately. That's all being taken care of for me. So as a programmer, I'm quite happy doing these kinds of things. What I don't like doing is taking responsibility for site reliability, because that's not my area of expertise. I'd rather have somebody else do it for me. And in this case, I don't need a human being to do it for me, because Divio Cloud is doing it, is taking care of that. It's got all those settings and configurations of all those DevOps related things, all those things that are below the application layer. Those are being taken care of for me by people who know how it really works and have baked it into the system so that it will happen reliably every single time. And we're using Docker containerization here. So whatever I happen to have running in my Docker container locally, when I run Docker Compose up here, because it's the same code and configuration that are running locally on my computer inside the container as are running on the cloud platform, I've got to guarantee that what works locally on my machine is going to work on the cloud. And for somebody like me who's suffered very badly while struggling with deployments in the past, this is something that actually I am really glad to be able to use. So I honestly don't think there is a more convenient or swifter way to go through that development cycle all the way, as you saw, starting from scratch to a real live deployment. Oh, I can actually go ahead and do the live deployment here. The only thing I haven't done is wire up a domain name to this, which would be the next step. And then the site would actually be live in an appropriate live configuration that is ready hardened for production use. The differences between the test and live server, they're all contained in the environment variables for each project. So that's how they have their own settings for database and media and so on, and debug mode is off on the live server and so on. Now, I'm going to stop talking now because I think I've spoken enough. I'm very happy to have some of your questions. Everything that we've done here is contained in tutorials and documentation that we have on our platform. We've got support articles, we've got support.devio.com, and we've got docs.devio.com for support articles to get people started with things and managing basic things on the platform, and the docs.devio.com for the application developer material. So please have a look at those. But you'll also find me on the Wagtail Slack, and I'm really happy to talk to people there and answer their questions. But I think Tom's got some questions stacked up for us now. So the last thing I will do is just prove to you that the live site is working. I haven't pushed the content up to it yet. That would be the next thing to do once I've verified all that. But this would be a live site with all the code, with all the configuration ready to go. In fact, what I'll do while Tom is getting those questions ready, I'm going to copy all the data from the test and deploy it to live.
The madewithwagtail.org site, who's behind it, and I guess could you mention its purpose perhaps? What's it there for?
This isn't an official Wagtail site, although it's one that we've used very widely. It was built by an organisation called Springload, who are an amazing agency in New Zealand, very early adopters and big supporters of Wagtail. And about 2 ex-Springload people are now on the Wagtail core team. Springload themselves have changed direction a bit, so they're more focused on strategy, doing amazing work there, but less on content management. So they built this as a sort of weekend hack thing, and it's been great for highlighting nice Wagtail sites. But I think we ought to bring it under new management, and there's a slight question about how we do that. If it should be just kind of managed by the core team, which would sort of make sense, but would be an extra burden to the core team, and then whether it should be purely democratic, so every site that gets submitted goes up there, or whether we want to keep it as a sort of showcase for the most impressive and the best looking sites. I'm not sure on the answer for that yet, but it's under discussion, and hopefully we'll have some clearer direction on it in the next few weeks.
Child themes in WordPress, essentially you can extend a parent theme to WordPress so that you can without changing the sort of master theme, if you like, you can make modifications and so forth. What's the planning and thinking in and around something similar for that for Wagtail themes?
Yeah, I think that's a really it's an impressive part of WordPress, the way that you can select WordPress and then you can choose a theme and then you have the site that's sort of 50% done already. Wagtail's not really like that, because with Wagtail the expectation is that developers will define the models, the page types, and then the templates exactly themselves, which means that we have much better flexibility and you can build exactly the site you want. On the other hand, I recognize that this can be a slightly underwhelming experience when you start with Wagtail, and I think it would be good for us to have some clearer way of doing themes. So perhaps when you do Wagtail Start, we could say Wagtail Start blog or Wagtail Start news site or something, and we could build in some themes. However, there are people doing this already, and you can see on GitHub there are quite a few distributions of Wagtail that have opinions and make it simpler to get started. The other thing I would say about child themes in particular, the particular point of this question, is that Django kind of makes this pretty easy just out of the box. And Django has this lovely concept of inheritance that's since been widely copied by other templating paradigms. And it means that once you've defined your parent theme, it's very easy to inherit from that and then to adapt in different cases. So it's a slightly different way of working to parent and child themes in WordPress, but it's one that gives a lot of flexibility, I think, from a programmer's point of view. Yeah.
Also on, I should say, on the Devio platform, we have some functionality that can do some of this. So we have what are called boilerplates. Once you've set up a site in a way that works for you, if you're an agency, likely you'll want to repeat that same thing without having to repeat yourself every single time. So you can set up a kind of base project and then fork it for the next version, which will include everything that you already built into the first one. You can also go a step further and build an actual boilerplate package. And we do this, we don't have boilerplates for Wagtail, but we do this with Django CMS so that you can launch a Django CMS project. Now, Django CMS, just like Wagtail, is completely front-end agnostic, but we can make it available packaged with a foundation front end or a Bootstrap 4 front end or something else, or even quite complex node-based front ends. And it's not quite the same thing as a theme, because you still have to use Bootstrap or whatever to do your styling, but it is already set up with all of that ready to start using Bootstrap or Foundation or whatever. And it would be perfectly possible to do the same thing for Wagtail, for example, to launch Wagtail together with various components that you want for it, whether on the front end or indeed the back end.
How does Wagtail sit in contrast to Django CMS? In terms of the offering and so forth, how would one make the decision between the two, and how do they sit together? Should we start with you, Daniela? Perhaps you have some thoughts.
Well, I have to confess that I am certainly more familiar with Django CMS than with Wagtail. In fact, I'm one of the Django CMS developers. Having said that, I have been involved in building Wagtail sites, and for some users, it's been more appropriate to recommend Wagtail to them, because I've had a sense that the way they're thinking about their content or their pages, maybe because of the experiences they've had before with other systems, seems more suited to using with Wagtail. And I've seen people get very good results from that. My general weapon of choice would still generally be Django CMS, but that's familiarity. I think they're probably, it's a matter of familiarity, taste, and what seems to be the best tool for the job in particular circumstances. I think that they both prove themselves in very large and also quite small installations, so we know how flexible they both are. Maybe Tom, you've got a better.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably know Django CMS less well than you know Wagtail, but and so you must correct me if I mischaracterize this, but I think I agree with you that it's the differences around the sort of ways that people think about their sites, and I think Wagtail probably fits more a sort of page-orientated view of the site.
Yeah.
So Wagtail, by default, thinks about content as pages, whereas Django CMS more has this idea of blocks that you can use to reuse, and you build up blocks to make pages that can be shared across. Wagtail has a strong sense of a tree, so hierarchical content, which I think is less of a sort of dominant theme in Django CMS. Django CMS has this nice editing from the front end point of view, which I think is really good for making short, quick fixes. But I feel like the Wagtail model is more focused on authoring content, new content, and thinking about the authoring environment as separate from the front end.
Great, thank you.
Try them both.
We tried to
Try them both, yeah.
Should we try to squeeze in I think we've got just about time for 3 more questions that will surround us.
Yeah, we'll keep them quick.
Yeah, so we'll have to do some quick fire here. So if one of your one of your requirements, your pip requirements in the requirements text has a dependency to Wagtail, which is newer than the latest Wagtail add-ons available, what would be your answer to that?
Well, the Wagtail add-on that we use on Divio, the Devio platform, is open source. It can be updated very quickly and very easily. We tend to keep it up to date, but it can also be maintained on a community basis by anybody who wants to update it. And people do that. So it's very easy to keep things up to date. And of course, you can always fork it and use those things in your project anyway. You don't need an add-on to put something into a Devio Cloud project.
Yeah. And on the theme of add-ons then, so we saw during your demo there using an add-on. Can you use a private repository URL as a source for your add-ons? How would that work with Devio?
Yes, you can, and we are actually developing ways that will make it easier to turn existing repositories into add-ons for our platform. So that's going to become easier and more flexible in the future, but basically the answer is yes, you can. And that question was from Vinod. Vinod, we're already talking on Slack, so drop me a line about that and I can answer you more fully.
Okay, we'll try to squeeze in one more. And thank you very much, everyone, for bearing with us here. The last one then. So in the case of people that perhaps prefer to use the command line, I'm one myself. Would it always be possible to use the Devio command line or the Docker Compose commands, or will the Devio app be required in some form?
The Devio app basically packages up commands that we issue on the command line. You saw me using Git, you saw me using Docker Compose, and the Devio command. So the Devio app is a wrapper for those commands. You can do everything on the command line.